A young white man married a black rich woman for her money, but he never expected her to do this. A young man married a black woman just because she was rich. He had no idea what she would do. Mornings were peaceful on Long Island's North Fork. Two people stood out in a cold, empty courtroom. One was a handsome young white man with desire-filled eyes, and the other was a lovely black woman who appeared so young and graceful that was impossible to guess her age. Henry Wright's future bride, Nyla Thompson, stood across from him in her nicest dress. Wright smiled confidently. A white lace dress and gold rings and chains on her flesh were worth more than his stuff combined. He thought he won. Their wedding was seconds away, as far as everyone knew. Henry was born in Manhattan and grew up there. He is the youngest of 3 children. A very wealthy businessman named Clark was his father. He became famous in New York years before his children were born. He met his wife, Victoria Price, early in his career when she was still an inspiration at Columbia Law School. Along with his brother, they took over his father's business and grew it with the same vision that made his father famous. Vicky got pregnant with twins, Maya and Chloe, in 1995 after being married for 10 years. In 1999, Henry came along 4 years later as the youngest and only boy. His parents loved him very much. The word struggle had never been in his vocabulary because he had never lived without money. The Wright kids lived their lives in private acres. They had a lot of tutors, coaches, and teachers at their hands, and all of them worked hard to make sure the kids did well, while their parents worked hard in the background. Following their mother's path, the girls went to college and got well-known jobs, while their little brother did almost nothing. He saw life as nothing but a game. He was already partying too much, hanging out with the wrong people, and ignoring the little duty he had by the time he was in high school. He never did his homework or went to school, and he was rude and disrespectful to his teachers every time he left. Henry never thought about going to college because he had been told from a young age that he would not only get a job at his dad's business, but also eventually take it over. Even though he didn't know anything about business, he was happy to follow in his dad's path. He often bragged about the chance, not because he was proud of his father's business, but because he knew he would be successful and wealthy for the rest of his life without doing anything. His father was caught on several counts of tax fraud when Henry was only 18 years old. He was a main suspect in a number of scandals that rocked the state of New York. That day, when the cops broke into their house and arrested Clark, along with all their things, Henry was furious. He yelled some bad words and said that his family's rights had been violated and that his mother would hurt the police department's image. He asked their names and ID numbers, but they wouldn't give them to him. His orders were ignored for the first time ever, which made him very angry. As he watched his father get put into the back of a police car, he kept calling the police names because he thought they were wrong and only wanted to hurt his family. But Clark West was taken to county jail anyway. The house was full of police officers for days while Henry and his sisters were being questioned. They didn't know about the accusations made against their dad. Victoria, on the other hand, wouldn't talk and insisted on a lawyer before the police could ask her any questions about her husband. Following 3 years, Clark Wright was given a jail term for fraud, theft, and money laundering. Even though he was only given 20 years, since he was 60 years old, it was really a life sentence. Vicky got 8 years in prison because she helped the criminal. The once proud family business fell apart as many facts came to light during the trial. The matter did not only hurt Wright's reputation, but it also took away a lot of the money he had built up over the years. What Henry found himself facing after the fall was something he had not expected. With the business gone, they could no longer live the luxury life they used to. He only had the sour taste of his own spoiled past to remember. The life he thought was perfect had fallen apart, and the world outside his protected bubble was full of problems he wasn't ready to handle. He was lucky that someone had left him a trust fund with $2 million in it. He didn't know much about money though, so the money was gone in a few years. By the time he was 22, the $2 million had seemed like a lot of money had been spent carelessly, wasted on bad habits and the search for a lifestyle that he could no longer find. As Henry's last safety net fell apart, the danger of unpaid bills and an empty bank account made him scramble to face what was going to happen. There was no way out for Henry but to enter a world he had never seen before. His childhood fell apart, and the man who used to brag about having a lot of money without working for it was humbled by the harsh truths of minimum wage. It was a rough change. Henry now had to deal with the boredom of clocking in and out, the physical demands of his job, and the fact that his pay barely covered his expenses. Every shift made him think of how he had fallen from favor and into the harsh reality of the working class. He felt angry as he tried to get around in a world where wealth wasn't a currency. The anger that was clearly shimmering under the surface was fed by his dislike of his new situation. He used to not like the taste of poverty, but now he couldn't get rid of the awful taste it gave him. Henry never thought he would be so desperate that he would make a smart choice to get married in order to get the money he was missing. Nyla Thompson, a black businesswoman who was 67 years old and very rich, walked in. She was born and raised in Philadelphia, where her family had lived for many years. Henry had met her briefly at a party a few years before, and they got along great. Henry told Nyla about his life. The two became close because they were both grieving. Henry had lost his father, and Nyla had just lost her husband. As the night came to a close though, they left with no plans to see each other again. After a few years, Henry was still having trouble with his new life, and the image of Nyla Thompson kept coming back to him. When he was having a hard time with money, knowing about her wealth and success helped him find his way. Henry made up his mind to get in touch with Nyla again. He carefully put together a message that told a story of being alone and wanting to connect with others. He was used to playing the pity card and making himself look like a victim of things that were out of his control. To his surprise, Nyla answered, interested in Henry's words because they seemed so honest. She agreed to have a coffee with him while she was in New York on business. They were sitting next to each other in a cute cafe, and their lives could not be more different. Henry wore old clothes and had a tired look on his face, while Nyla wore expensive clothes and was beaming with confidence. Henry avoided talking about his money problems by carefully picking words that made him sound like someone who had been dealt an unfair hand. The conversation went smoothly. He didn't talk much about himself for the first time in his life. Instead, he tried to make the conversation about Nyla's life and humanity in a subtle way. He admired her strength and determination in breaking down barriers in the business world, which is often controlled by stereotypes. As the date went on, Henry started to carefully get involved in Nyla's life by going to events and parties where he could show off his charm and charisma, which he thought would win her over. He was a good listener and nodded along while she talked about her problems she faced as a successful black woman in a business world run mostly by white men. On the other hand, Henry's determination and what seemed like real interest in Nyla's life interested her. Henry didn't know it, but she had her own doubts about what he was up to, but she chose to enjoy his company without having to fully commit. As the seasons changed, so did the way Henry and Nyla's relationship worked. In just a few months, Henry quit his fast food job and turned in his apartment key. He moved into her apartment, which had a view of the city, and they spent time together. Many people in high society thought they were dating because they went to social events together, but the truth was hidden behind the perfect picture of a loving couple they projected to the world. Now that a year had passed since that important talk in the cafe, Henry was struggling with an unspoken question. What was the next step in their relationship? Or, more importantly, what was the next step in his plan to make him rich? It was a calm night, and the city lights sparkled outside the apartment, which was where they often went to get away from everything. Henry brought up a subject that hadn't been talked about in a year at dinner. He thought carefully about what to say as Nyla looked at him with a knowing look while she sipped her wine. "Nyla," he said, looking into her eyes to make sure she understood. "I've grown to value the time we've spent together over the past year. Even though it changed my life, I'm still worried about the future." Nyla, who was always calm, looked at him with a constant gaze and pushed him to keep going. "What is it that you're pondering about the future, Henry?" she asked him. He wasn't sure what to say at first, so he took a deep breath and then said, "Marriage." Nyla's eyes twitched with doubt as the word hung in the air. "Getting married is a big step, Henry. What do you want to find? Peace of mind, safety, and the promise of a future with you," she replied. His answer was, "I love you, Nyla." Nyla's eyes stayed on him the whole time, and her face was hidden. The woman kept saying, "security and stability," and her voice was almost a whisper. "Henry, there's something you need to know before we go ahead with this," Nyla told him as she leaned in. "What's on your mind?" Henry asked. Nyla took a deep breath. There was a mix of fear and determination in her eyes. "I was told I had breast cancer that would kill me almost 5 years ago. Henry, I don't have time on my side." The sudden news put a dark shadow over the room. He got a chill down his spine as he thought about how heavy Nyla's words were. Her eyes were trying to figure something out. "If this changes things, I won't hold it against you. It's a lot to think about, and I want you to make a choice after carefully understanding what it means," Nyla said. The news was terrible, but Henry was excited. He wouldn't have to wait decades to get her fortune now, but he carefully concealed his joy at the thought of marrying a woman who was dying by having a sympathetic attitude. He didn't give up and kept going. He felt bad for her and squeezed her hand to make her feel better. "Oh, Nyla, I'm so sorry," he said, "but I don't have to deal with you. It would be an honor to take care of you. Your last words are what you leave behind. Let me be the one to do them. Let me help you in any way I can." Nyla gave him a small nod after she had thought about it for a moment. "Okay, is this really what you want? If you're ready to be with me through good times and bad, then let's do it," she said. "Let's get married." Henry gave Nyla a warm hug and his eyes sparkled with a hint of happiness. There were plans made for the wedding, and as the day got closer, Henry kept up his act as the dedicated groom, hiding how excited he really was. He couldn't believe that the day had finally come. He was standing in front of Nyla with the ring burning in his breast pocket. No one outside of the court knew what was really going on. Nyla's health started to get worse quickly over the next few months. The strong, confident woman who used to be full of life was now just a shadow of herself. The cancer in her breast that would not go away hurt her body, and every day seemed like a race against time. As the devoted husband, Henry went with her to many doctor's appointments, giving comfort and support while secretly counting down the days until he could claim the inheritance he was so looking forward to. The loft used to be full of laughter and the sound of glasses clicking, but now there was only the sound of a heartbeat. Nyla's energy dropped, and the socialite, who used to be very active, was now stuck in bed, losing power all the time. Henry put on his act, even though he was really excited, because he knew his patience was about to pay off. As Nyla's health got worse, it got harder to keep up the appearance that they were happily married. The act put a lot of stress on both of them. Henry tried hard to hide how impatient he was, and Nyla, in her last days, struggled with a mix of acceptance and the need for real company. After being married for 11 months, Nyla called Henry to her bedroom one night. The loss of her strength was leaving her. It was like her body was finally telling her it was time. "Henry," she said in a weak voice that was a weak copy of the strong voice it used to be, "come sit next to me." Henry reluctantly walked up to her, and his face showed a careful mix of fake worry and anger. Nyla said, "Let's stop pretending any longer, Henry." Her words were sharp and direct. "I know why you came into my life and set up this marriage. The way we've been living is as clear as your goals." Henry was surprised by how direct she was, and he stumbled for a moment before he calmed down. "I don't understand what you mean, Nyla. I really care about you," he said. She reached for a small drawer in her bedroom side table with a tired smile on her face. It had a carefully sealed envelope that she took out. She held out a package to him and said, "This is for you." At the same time he took it, he felt her heavy gaze on him. As Nyla spoke, her eyes showed a mix of resignation and anger. "Open it when I'm gone," she stated. After those last words, Nyla leaned back against the pillow. Henry was furious and held the envelope like a decision. He couldn't say anything. "What is this, after all I've done for you?" He was furious. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes were sparkling with excitement. "But I'd say it's everything I've done for you, Henry. Face the truth and carry on with your life," she said. He looked at her like he couldn't believe it, and then stormed out of her house. He ripped the package open in a fit of anger and took out the stack of papers. The last will and testament of Nyla Brooks Thompson was on the front page. It was something he had been waiting months to see. After quickly reading it, Henry was sure of what he already knew to be true. He was leaving the marriage with only a divorce paper to show for it because Nyla had lied to him. In those pages, it was written that Nyla's money would be split evenly between her 2 boys and a few charities she chose. What was worse was a small phrase that said, "No vow to be published after death." Henry's heart rate dropped as he went further. He dug around in the package and found another stack of papers. This time, they were a manuscript. The fake shot of his father looked back at him with empty, haunted eyes. The title of the book, "The Downfall of the Wright Empire," was at the top of the cover. Nyla's name was at the bottom. It had a small note from the author that said, "In loving memory of my father." He saw it on the first page. "Pops, I miss you. Here is the law for you." The rest of Henry's evening was spent reading Nyla's expose. He was shocked to learn that the Wright and Thompson families had been connected for a long time. Even before he knew about Nyla, Kent, her father, and William Wright, Henry's grandpa, had been friends since they were kids. From the time they were kids, they were in the same group. By the time they were adults, they had teamed up and started their first business. They made a lot of money in the first 5 years. But as the business grew, so did the arguments between the 2 men. Devon was finally fired from his 20-year job as an executive in 1970 after a number of disagreements. Nyla's book went into a lot of depth about how her father was abused and harassed after he left. In just a few years, the Wrights and the false information they spread had completely ruined his professional image. Devon Thompson killed himself in 1978 when he was only 48 years old. He had lost everything he had worked hard to build for himself and his family. Nyla was 28 years old and just finished from Harvard Business School when she heard that her father had died. From then on, she promised to bring respect back to her family name and seek justice for what had been done to her father. After almost 40 years, Nyla, who had been keeping an eye on the Wright family, learned about the dark and wrong things that were happening behind the scenes of the business. Over the course of several years, she went out of her way to gather evidence so that she could give to the police. Soon after, they broke into the family's house and arrested Clark and Victoria Wright for helping the family keep doing illegal things. The book had been planned for a long time. Even before Nyla met Henry, their chance meeting was like fate. It gave Nyla the last piece she needed to finish her story. Now, several pages were dedicated to the young white man who gasped in horror when he realized he was being exposed, just like his father had been a few years before. Following the news, Henry's world fell apart once more. He worked hard to get the fortune, but it slipped through his fingers like sand. That report that Nyla wrote not only showed the Wright family's sins, but it also showed Henry's real goals for their marriage. The people who didn't know about his true intentions saw him for what he really was, a man who, like his father and grandfather, was willing to take advantage of someone else's weakness to get what he wanted. While Henry dealt with the damage to his family name and effects of his actions, Nyla was able to look forward to the last parts of her life. The Wright family's wrongdoings coming to light brought justice for her father's memory and gave her some peace as she left the world. The comfort in the thought that her memory would be one of fairness and redemption. The novel she wrote, which was her last act of rebelliousness, would make sure that the Wright Empire had to deal with the effects of its mistakes long after she was gone. She could rest easy, knowing that her job was done after seeing Henry fall from glory. What a story! Let us know what you think about it in the comment section below.